I'm Julian Castro, this handsome young gentleman to my, can I still call you young? You turned 40 this week.
I just turned 40, that's
Yes.
right.
All
I
right.
think I'm officially old.
All right. He was sworn as the 16th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development on July 28th, this summer. It's a role in which he oversees 8,000 employees and a budget of $46 billion. President Obama described him at the time as a proven leader and a champion for safe, affordable housing and strong, sustainable neighborhoods, which is sort of encompasses our subject today. The president tasked Julian with nothing less than rebuilding our housing market, reducing homelessness among veterans, connecting neighborhoods with good schools and good jobs that helps our citizens succeed. In March 2010, you were named to the World Economic Forum's list of young global leaders, so good thing you got in under the wire. Time magazine placed him on its 40 under 40 list of rising stars, and so you don't get that designation anymore either. Previously, he served as a member of San Antonio City Council. He's also an attorney, worked at Aiken Gump before starting his own practice. Secretary Castro received a bachelor's degree from Stanford, which is in the neck of the woods where I grew up, and graduate of Harvard Law School. So thank you for agreeing to do this. My first question for you is, let's go back to San Antonio if we can, because that's where you made your bones, right? In 2013, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce named San Antonio one of 7 enterprising cities for the United States for fostering a better business culture. Not always what you think of when you think of Democrats, but there were other Democrats on that list. So my question is, how did you do it?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the question, and thanks to RealClearPolitics and Results America for having us, and to everybody for being here. And I also wanted to express my appreciation for the focus on mayors. As a former mayor, I know what a powerful role that can be in implementing public policy, setting a vision, and achieving results. And it's clear that America's cities are where things are getting done today, so it's a good focus. In San Antonio, we had a very clear vision of trying to create a brainpower community that was the liveliest city in the United States. And that was the vision that was set as part of something called SA 2020, which was about a 6-month process that involved 5,000 San Antonians giving us their ideas on what we needed to do to become a greater city by Friday, September 25th, 2020, which was exactly 10 years after we kicked it off. So to answer your question, I think what we did was that we took a perspective of fostering public-private partnerships, of looking for ways to be creative in terms of our economic development. The best example of that was that San Antonio owns the largest municipal utility that services both electric and gas customers, which is CPS Energy. And like a lot of utilities, in about the 2008-2009 timeframe, it had set a goal that 20% of its energy portfolio would be renewables by 2020. And so we took that and said, well, if we're going to reach that goal and we're going to establish long-term power purchase agreements, what we need to do is get those companies to actually locate their jobs here. And one of the biggest successes that we had was a 400 megawatt solar deal that brought 805 jobs, essentially all of the manufacturing associated with panels and distribution there to San Antonio. And I think it was that vision, it was the public-private partnership posture that we took.
Let me ask you about that solar, because this was going on at the time the president who nominated you and appointed you was getting beaten up over Solyndra. What did you do differently than some of these other communities that tried to bring in solar and ended up paying at cost and bad public relations? What was the key to it?
Well, yeah, I can't speak for the other communities, but I would say that for San Antonio, we were very focused on a competitive process, bidding process for that contract that took into account the financial stability of the companies that were bidding, that was focused on the ability of their different contractors to meet the goals that were set out as part of the RFP, And so it was a thorough process that took several months and was first of its kind for San Antonio, but so far it has been successful. They actually have lived up to all of the obligations that were set out in the contract. I'd also say that just generally, I know that this was, it's like a lot of sectors. It has elements to it that are newer, and so you're going to get some amount of success and failure, and it's not surprising that not every time we have one of these deals that it's not always going to be a success.
Let's switch to education for a minute. And staying in San Antonio, you don't mind that. You improved graduation rate. Graduation rates improved markedly during your tenure there, and the number of San Antonio seniors going to college. What did you do? Was this just luck, or did you have a program, a vision?
Well, there's definitely a vision, but I cannot take wholesale credit for that, especially because...
You're not going to fit in here in Washington.
Yeah, I wish I could take all the credit for it. In San Antonio, we have 15 different independent school districts. So think about the communities that y'all come from. Like DC has the DC Public Schools. If you're in Houston, you have HISD or LA Unified. We have 15 within the bounds of the city. And but I think a couple of things. There was a strong vision, and I did use the bully pulpit, I think, a lot more than most mayors in Texas do. Most mayors just say, well, it's so fractured that we're not going to, it's not really our business, and we didn't have any direct control over the schools. We had a very strong vision to increase graduation rates, increase kinder readiness, increase third grade reading scores, and we saw those things improve. We also did some innovative things like create Cafe College, which was this one-stop center for middle schoolers and especially high schoolers for free, whether they go to public school, private school, they're homeschooled, to get expert advice on financial aid and admissions, because we found that the ratio of students to counselors in our schools was, I believe it was 420 to 1, 420 students to 1 counselor. And so that was a real need there.
That reminds me, teen pregnancy rates have been going down, but they went down faster in San Antonio. Did what was going on in the schools help with that?
It did. It also benefited from a very strong collaboration between the city, the University of Texas Health Science Center there, and a nonprofit that's been working in San Antonio for a couple of decades now to look at, in a very methodical way, the census tracts where we had the highest teen pregnancy rates, and then to go and attack the problem there in surrounding schools, in health clinics, and to, I think, put a greater spotlight on it. I also believe that in terms of lowering the teen pregnancy rate, that we benefited from the fact that more folks were choosing to stay in school. You could see that young people were choosing to get ahead first and putting off the decision perhaps for a while to whether they're a girl or a boy, to become a parent.
Now, when you were a young man in San Antonio, Riverwalk was not yet built, right? It's just
no, it was built. It was a WPA project.
Oh, yeah. So, but the town, I went there to cover Henry Cisneros, who you know. But it seemed like a sleepy little town. I was there a couple years ago. It's a thriving city, and I wanted to ask you about the newest thing, what was it, Decade of Downtown Initiative? That was yours. $350 million. Where did that money to go into downtown? Where did that money come from?
Yeah, well, so from about 2011 through, let's say now, there are about $350 million of private sector investment that is being put into downtown housing, new downtown urban core housing, and about $35 to $40 million of public investment. So that's the private investment. What stimulated was incentives that we put into place at City Hall and also through our water system with things like impact fee waivers. And some of it was tax abatements, some of it was impact fee waivers, and some of it was actually direct incentives, direct cash, to get folks to invest in areas that had not been invested in before. the upshot of all that is that by the end of 2014, essentially, there will have been, in that 3-year time frame, about 2,400 to 2,500 new housing units that will have been built there.
Do you, well, going back to the environment for a minute, now this is a trivial thing maybe, but it's symbolic. In 2008, at the convention where Barack Obama was nominated, they had this bike share program. And it was new, and they gave the reporters, if you had a hard pass or if anybody that was there, I rode all over downtown Denver on it. You've got that now in San Antonio. Did you get your idea from that convention? Is that how ideas get around?
I wish I could give Denver credit, but actually, when I was a councilman from 01 to 05.
You were doing it before Obama.
No. We started it afterward. But I remember reading an article when I was a councilman about Madison, Wisconsin's Red Bike program. I don't know if anybody's from Madison or familiar with Madison. And we were the first city in Texas to actually do a bike share program. And now it's been very successful. I think it's second because we have the same company, B-Cycle, that runs it. I think Denver places first and San Antonio places second in terms of usage.
Okay. Well, we've got it here now. It's a little humid around here to use it, but it's often remarked that Washington is gridlocked and partisan, but your confirmation as Secretary of HUD was a foregone conclusion. I think the final vote was 71-26. I suspect it would have been greater if this were not an election year. One of those singing your praises was Republican Senator John Cornyn, who appeared before the Senate Banking Committee, gave testimony, and what he said, I'm going to have a quote from him. Mayor Castro has taken quite a road to get where he is today, one that's uniquely Texan and I would say uniquely American. My question is, how did you win him over?
Thanks for the question. First, I was obviously very, very happy to get Senator Cornyn's support, and what I assured him is that I want to work with folks on both sides of the aisle, and the fact is that I would say 90% of the work that we do in most of these agencies, but particularly in an agency like HUD, is non-political. Maybe more than 90%. It's not really impacted by whether folks are Democrats or Republicans. When you get to questions of resources and should we have more resources, or sometimes there are some programs that do become more political, it gets into that realm. But the vast majority of what we do, people on both sides have been funding for a while. So it was a matter of just laying out my perspective on that. And also in San Antonio, because I was a mayor and mayors are elected in a nonpartisan context, I've had the chance to work with Republicans and with Democrats, and that was actually what I enjoyed about being mayor the most, is that you're not elected, by party, and so there's no party line to toe with folks. You can, talk to folks, and there's not kind of a guard that is up in the same way that when you are in a partisan system. My brother Joaquin is in his first term of Congress.
That's a different environment up there.
Yeah, no doubt. And I remember when we went block walking, when I ran for city council I was 26 in 2001, and we would go to people's houses on the list, whether they were Republican or Democrat, and you'd talk to them about economic development or their streets or code compliance issues. And then we went for his election a year later, his campaign, and first of all, the walk sheets mostly had the consistent Democrats and some moderates. But every now and then we would get to a home that made it onto the list somehow that was not a Democratic household, and they said, challenge you right away as a Democrat, which is natural.
Well, so that explains my next question. I was going to ask you, so John Cornyn was with you, but Ted Cruz was against you. So I'm inferring that he mixed you up with your brother, which is why he voted against you.
I don't know. We do look the same. He and I had a very good meeting beforehand, and we had a good chat about good barbecue places in D.C. And
he went in and voted against you anyway.
Did.
At the Bipartisan Policy Center's Housing Summit earlier this week, you said it's time to remove the stigma associated with promoting home ownership. What did you mean by that?
What I meant is that, and what I outlined in the speech, and I'm sure folks have seen over the last several years, is that a few years ago, because of bad loans that were made and risky secondary market products that were sold, we had a housing crisis. And as soon as that happens, there was blame that went around everywhere, and probably blame that was deserved all around. But one of the byproducts of that over the last few years has been that folks have been somewhat reticent about promoting home ownership in the way that they did before. Even though we have had reforms that I think have made things better, have offered stronger protections, and some are being worked on now, housing finance reform, for instance. So, and you combine that with the fact that today it is very, very difficult for first-time home buyers and for people that have a credit score less than 680 to get a loan. In fact, the average credit score for the government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie and Freddie, is 750, which is just astronomically high. So you have a lot of folks that under normal circumstances, and I'm not talking about during the boom years when anybody could get a loan, but let's say 2000 or 1995 or whatever year you want to pick outside of that different time period, people who under normal circumstances would be getting loans who are now not able to do that. And that's what I meant. That
well, you yourself had said it was probably too easy to get a loan before. Are you saying it's too hard now?
Yeah, and I said that directly.
Yeah, we've gone too far?
I said that the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction, and that one of the goals I have is in a responsible way to promote home ownership and do what we can so that folks who are responsible borrowers can get into a home.
So you think that, all right, but we don't want to rekindle another, crisis.
Oh, no, absolutely not. And so, you need to make sure that people are responsible. There are controls, better controls, I believe, that are in place that have been taken on by the private sector and some of it legislatively. And it's not all finished, though. That's why housing finance reform, the reform of Fannie and Freddie is still, I think, necessary. But we are in a better place, a much better place than we were before, and I think more sober about these things and perhaps have gone too far in this direction and need to bring it back to a place where more people have the opportunity to own a home.
Can I ask you about one subset of people you don't hear much yet, and there are millions of them, not first-time home buyers, but second-time home buyers who got in there and defaulted. Their house went bankrupt. They had to walk away from it. Whatever. There's different stories. Can they ever? I mean, is the government worried about them? You don't want them to be stigmatized so they can never buy a house again. How do you get these people back into the market?
Well, we are. You want folks. There were millions of people over the last few years who had an unprecedented event in their life. They had been doing well before then. They were hit by this housing crisis. A lot of them, as you say, ended up with their homes foreclosed. And so there are folks working in areas like housing counseling, credit repair. We're working with folks who may be in the foreclosure process now to try and get them out of it so that hopefully they can avoid foreclosure. So we have taken steps over the last few years to work with people who are being foreclosed upon to try and save them and keep them in their home. And then there are nonprofits that are working across the nation with folks who now have bad credit to try and help them repair it and also to help ensure that folks make more sound decisions financially so that they don't get into the same shape they were before.
All right, let me ask you about another aspect of this vast new agency that you lead. There's thousands of public housing units every year that are sort of disappearing, just sort of going away. The stock is disappearing through disrepair. I mean, they're just uninhabitable, thousands. What do you have plans to deal with that? What should the government be doing to arrest that problem?
Yeah, currently we lose about 10,000 public housing units every single year. And so, that's an issue, of course, because we have growing needs and at the same time declining resources for public housing. I mean, just think about for a second, when was the last time that you saw a real robust focus on traditional public housing? The last time we heard about that really was I think, in the 90s when a lot of the older units were being brought down in Chicago and other places. So one good example is our RAD, or rental assistance demonstration, which is essentially involving the private sector now and having them bring units up to speed through financing that is government-based, that fundamentally keeps control in the public sector, but also allows for a profit in the private sector, but gets them involved in trying to repair these units and get folks to be able to live in quality, affordable units instead of in the units that are in disrepair now, or some units that we can no longer use, so we don't have any families in there.
HUD announced earlier this month that it's preparing another portfolio of what it calls non-performing loans for sale, mortgage loans. This is the sixth time that's done that in the last 2 years, but the first time under your tenure at HUD. It's a sale that encompasses, I think, about 15,000 mortgages, $2.3 billion total. You received a letter from two community housing advocate groups. They sent you a petition protesting these sales. What was your response?
Well, HUD is still preparing its response, but they're talking about the distressed asset sales program.
Right.
And so this is essentially combining loans together. And the purpose of it really is to give folks who are in the process, who look like they may well be foreclosed upon, to have an opportunity to avoid that. And the issue that the nonprofits brought up, among other things, is that they feel like nonprofits have not been able to participate in the purchase of these loans. The reason they say they want nonprofits to be able to participate is that they feel that nonprofits would put in extra effort and marry that with their community revitalization efforts so that you save neighborhoods in a better fashion than if you just allow the private sector to do it.
You sound sympathetic to that point of view.
Well, and we've told them that we're thinking through that, and I agree that that we can find ways for nonprofits to have a better opportunity. You have to set up a fair process, so you can't give things to anybody, but we can set up a process, I think, that perhaps gives them a better opportunity to participate, and that's what we're working on.
And now another idea that's come up from the grassroots is that cities could use the eminent domain to take these loans. Where are you on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and this was a question that was asked in my confirmation hearing, and it was a...
You know more now, though.
I do, yeah. I hope. It was a novel approach to me when I was being confirmed. That's not something San Antonio had done. Really, it's only something that a few cities had tried. And as far as I'm concerned, HUD is not going to get involved in that at this point. We're letting, local and state entities decide their approach on that. So HUD is not involved in that right now.
FHA also comes under HUD's purview, and last year, for the first time, that agency went to Congress for it. Hat in hand, it needed $1.7 billion in taxpayer money. It got it, but Republicans are still talking about it. John Cornyn, despite supporting you, he mentioned this at your confirmation hearing. Will someone please get this phone from me? No? Okay. Anyway, and thank you, Meg. And Jeb Hensarling, another fellow Texan, said if the Federal Housing Administration was a private financial institution, someone would likely be fired, someone would be fined, or the institution itself would find itself in receivership. That's kind of harsh, but what would you say in response to that?
So the FHA took what's called a draw to bolster its fund, insurance fund. That was the first time that the FHA had to do that. As you can imagine, that was a result of the dip that we saw, both the dip that we saw in our housing market and also the increased number of claims that had to be paid out from the fund over time. The good news is that in about 6 weeks, we'll have the actuarial report, annual actuarial report for the FHA fund come out, and we can say with confidence that the FHA is not going to need another draw it's on a positive trajectory, and it's expected to keep getting stronger. So that was an unprecedented event. Several steps have been taken to improve the quality of loans that are insured, and also to bolster the insurance fund itself. And it shouldn't be necessary again.
All right, well, thank you for answering these policy questions, but we're Real Clear Politics. So I'm going to end with, I've got a couple of political questions to throw to you before we open it up. Your first one is, you're considered close to the Clintons and have already been mentioned prominently as a potential running mate for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Now, I plead guilty to this premature speculation myself because even though you and your brother only turned 40 a week ago, I had mentioned you and Joaquin as possible running mates before either one of you had even arrived in Washington, so mea culpa. But, so I won't ask you for the inevitable demurals, but I will ask you this way. If a member of Congress trumps a mayor, at least in D.C. think, does a cabinet secretary trump a congressman?
That's a good question. You'd probably ask my brother and get a different answer. No, when you turn 40, for those of y'all that have, people make such a big deal out of that obviously you have to reflect a little bit on your life, right? And so it has been unique for us, for both of us, to have been in public service together. And we went to college together, we went to law school together, and now we're both here in D.C. together. And I'm having the time of my life, getting to be in public service, and then also to get to be close to my brother. My brother habitually says that the way to tell us apart, since we're twins, is that I'm a minute uglier than he is. And the truth is that I'm a minute older than he is. And I tell folks the difference these days is that in D.C., I'm the one with the real job.
All right. So temperamentally, which one of you is better suited to be a number two?
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea. And neither one of us will be, so it doesn't matter.
All right. Well, I had a couple more political questions, but I'm getting a sign from my boss. Can we open it to questions from the audience? Do we have a microphone, and do we have anybody who wants to ask a question? I see some hands over here. Right here, Shelby, and in the back.
Can I hold it? You're going to hold it for me. Okay. Hi, Senator Bear with the Smart Cities Council. Thank you so much for the good answers to those questions. I'm curious, since housing and the built environment are so important to smart city innovation, I'm wondering what you might recommend as the best next step for the public sector, city leaders, and the private sector to get things moving in that arena around the U.S.
Yeah, thank you very much. A couple of things. Well, first, before I came over here, I was on a press conference call to announce the next round of Promise Zones. And so these Promise Zones are the effort of the Obama administration to combine all of the agency resources of the federal government with local initiative in the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector to lift up the quality of education, housing, transportation. So I believe that the lasting contribution of the administration is going to be that we need to look at how we better organize ourselves to do the classic thing that everybody talks about but seldom does, which is to break through the silos. So when we think about lifting cities up in the future, it's going to be how do we think about governance structures, for instance, that cut across agency lines. Oftentimes, there will be, for example, a council of governments. We had the Alamo, basically, council of governments. But they meet once a month, and there's not much activity there. I think the cities that really get it, that I see, are the ones that link up results that they're after in housing, in education, transportation, the arts, for instance. So if I had any advice in terms of the future for cities, I would say for leadership to look at how they can organize themselves in those ways.
Two more here.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Shipman with GAO. I'm curious, as a mayor, maybe more so than as a secretary, where do you get the kinds of information you need to make decisions, the kinds of evidence or whatever? Or is it something from inside the city, or do you work with other organizations outside to get that information?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And that is a great question, because I believe, after having served on a city council and then as mayor, that oftentimes that local leaders are challenged in terms of getting good evidence of what actually works. So I remember I used to read Governing Magazine. Anybody read Governing Magazine sometimes?
Aaron was the publisher of it.
Oh, there you go. Every now and then I would read Governing Magazine to look at what other cities are doing. I would look at the NLC's website. And I remember that the NLC back in like 1997 used to have this CD-ROM that they would sell of like X number of programs and what's been tried in other cities and what's worked, essentially to try and think about, if another city has been successful, how could we do that in our city? Would it fit? I do think there is a lot of room for in the nonprofit sector and the private sector to get better comparative information about programs to cities. And into the hands of mayors and of city managers and policymakers there. One of the things that I wanted to do when I became mayor that was a failure, because I never actually did it, never got around to it, was I wanted us to take one what was called a B session before our regular session a month, and to just have folks come in and give us the latest research on different issues that we were facing. Because if you think about it, in our process, even in Congress, policymakers actually spend very little time reading through and looking through in a disciplined way. Okay, this is the issue, and this is the evidence on it, and this is the way that we can go. Maybe one person does that, or a couple of people do it, but they don't do it as a group. And if you can inculcate that into the governance structure, I think that what you would get over time is you would get a lot better decisions being made, a lot longer term decisions, and more informed decisions being made on a whole range of different policy areas.
You still have a question in the back here? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, he's allowed.
Secretary, Russell Armstrong with Senate staff. You're coming from San Antonio, which is one of the fastest growing cities in the country, but a lot of urbanization is happening in small to mid-sized cities. What are some ways that HUD can actually help support, beyond just the public-private sector partnerships, those smaller cities that don't really know how to deal with all the growth that's coming to them?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for the question. It's a great question. So one of the things that HUD did a few years ago, for instance, under Secretary Donovan, was that it started this Strong Cities, Strong Communities effort, SC2. And this is an effort that essentially, in Gary, Indiana, for instance, I was just there a couple of weeks ago, it groups up about 9 or 10 federal agencies and sends people down there to that city to work with their city leaders in the respective areas, to give them technical assistance, build up their capacity and their ability to compete for federal grants, and also in the process, I think, for foundation investment and private sector investment. And so SC2 is a good example of what HUD has been trying to do to lift up the capacity of smaller communities. Another example is that in the Promise Zone application this time, we have 6 urban applications that'll be awarded and 2 rural/tribal community applications that'll be awarded. But in the urban context, we have some cities that are not your big cities. You may have cities that are 50,000 people. So it runs the gamut. The opportunities are there not only for the large cities like Los Angeles or New York, but for smaller cities as well.
Secretary Castro, I'm Adam O'Neill. I'm a reporter with RealClearPolitics. You said earlier that HUD is largely nonpartisan, but there obviously are some partisan divides and patterns. You look at Paul Krugman. He recently argued that the cause for migration from blue states to red states is affordable housing in the red states. The Johnson-Crapo bill, which you've called an unprecedented opportunity, It's being stalled because of prominent Democrats in the Senate and their opposition to it. So my question is, what are members of your party doing wrong on housing, whether it's at the state or federal level, and what are you doing to encourage them to change?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. Although I hope you won't mind if I don't answer it by saying what they're doing wrong on there. I would just say that in Johnson Crapo, for instance, you're correct. Although there are reservations on both sides of the aisle, there are folks on the left who believe that are a little bit uncomfortable with regard to getting rid of the housing goals. And there are folks on the right who think that Johnson Crapo still has too much government involvement, and they would like less or none. So I point that out because I believe that in the housing context, that Johnson Crapo is one example where people on both sides have made compromises. And having been a mayor and come from a nonpartisan environment, I think that any opportunities that there are for folks to develop relationships based on the subject matter or just personal relationships, the ability to have a good relationship that helps you work through some of those issues and trust each other is a positive thing. I don't think necessarily that that the challenge is as much ideological as it is that sometimes the foundation has not been laid there. I'll give you a quick example of that. My brother just started Congress, and he remarked very early on that from the beginning, as soon as they started, the Democrats had their orientation and the Republicans had their orientation, and they split up. They sit on different sides. Everything, in terms of the way things are structured, is set up to create opposing camps. And I'd be interested in comparing that with what we see with mayors and cities across the United States, and think through, how do you get folks to actually make more compromise?
I think we've got the mayors. I'm sorry. Can you maybe ask a question later? I'm sorry. I'm going to wrap it up now. I guess moderator's prerogative, ask you one last thing. Eric Pianin of the Fiscal Times talks about the HUD secretary curse. And I guess he's thinking of George Romney, who got the job after he lost to Richard Nixon for president. It was a consolation prize, was never heard again. Patricia Harris, who was Jimmy Carter's HUD secretary, then ran for mayor of Washington, lost to Marion Barry. Jack Kemp, who ran for the job I'm trying to get you to take, the number 2 on the 1996, and lost to Al Gore. Sam Pierce, who made such a mark in the Reagan campaign, in the Reagan cabinet, that President Reagan called him Mr. Mayor at some event at the White House. Didn't even know who he was. What are you going to do to escape the HUD secretary curse?
Well, I'm just going to try and do a great job in my role. And I figure, even if I'm gone, I have a twin brother, so they'll think he's me. There you go. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, y'all.